about communities that are spiritually balanced and going into those areas. Is there any stories or any stories you can think of where you're entering different communities that are spiritually balanced, or any times that you...
What we're seeing now in our communities is when I say, when one says imbalanced, that doesn't, it's kind of like saying dysfunctional. No individual or family is entirely dysfunctional. They have resources and they have strengths. And so in some way it is with spiritual balance or imbalance. So what we have because of our history is a conditioning that has removed us somewhat from our ancestral practices. So in particular, I think of purification and teachings. I wasn't taught by my mother's house, so it was something that I had to go out to find. So given that, I would say that generally we're in a state, if we look at fight, flight, freeze, we're in a state of freeze collectively. And that I would say movements that are connected to the land are about coming out of freeze and deactivating. So spiritual balance then is or the lack of it comes through conflict. And an example would be of both existing. There was a community that I was asked to help with. There was vandalism, and so I asked the government organization if they wanted me involved, if they were willing to follow ancestral teachings, and they said yes. So the first thing I did was get together with hereditary leadership, and the thing that I won't say I was surprised by, but I was charged by, were these 4 leaders knew all about these young people, their families, and their families were from other communities. So what I was witnessing was ancestral law in action, and it's that network, that connection between you and I, between us, that's invisible but that exists. So the balance came, or I saw it come up, when the hereditary leadership stepped in and they directed the way. And so this is what I think we need to be doing. We need to be looking at it. We have a lot of obstacles in order to do that, and challenges to do that because of the nature of trauma and being activated in how patterns are deeply ingrained. And I'm talking about family violence and abuse particularly.
Is there any way you can tell us a little bit more about the resolution of that and what the hereditary chiefs, they surrounded the children and they were able to address what happened in the most generalized?
Let's say the problem with that was, and I see, is that government organizations give, because there were finances involved, they give so much time. Time and money. Yeah. So it was extremely limited, and so this is where we have a lot of work to do in educating, and people who are in positions of authority and who understand the process need to give some space for it to happen, because as we're enacting it, there's a little bit of shakiness and a little bit of uncertainty, and yet at the same time there's a steady way of moving.
Can I take one more, or do you want?
Sure.
Okay. There's another one. When ensuring you're aware of the cultural teachings, do you speak to the elders when doing your research? Where do you get the teachings to ensure that they are correct and not from another perspective, aka
yeah, that's about fear, isn't it? Fear that I'm actually connecting to the authentic source, and I think it also comes from identity, that question, and I have a responsibility to myself first, and that comes through acknowledging the practices that help me to live in a respectful way. So that's the first thing, because distortion is a reality. And when I was doing research for my PhD, I decided I wasn't going to go to Anthros for the main sources. What I did was I went to 3 fluent speakers from my community, and I asked them questions around thought, thought and heart, around wrongdoing. So, because what I was interested in was the transformative aspects of ancestral law. So what I believe is that our language is our main resource and our main source for direction and understanding. I myself am not a fluent speaker, so that's why I see it's important to go to people, and especially those language carriers who are older and they spend time with elders.
So that's kind of where the source information is with speakers, because they have this worldview that's built into language. That's where you went to first personally, and so I think this person was kind of asking about how to do it as a practical way. It's going to finding that source,
yes.
finding the language speakers.
Yes. Yeah.
With that thought involved. There's a lot of communities though that do have this premise. I don't want to make it pan-Indian to say, oh, all nations are the same, but do you feel like within your work that communities do have this premise of respect, and that there's a foundation that we do share, like some of the foundation?
Definitely. I think that that respect is what connects us. Excuse me, in a really solid way.
As Indigenous people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, as any people, as human beings.
So let's move on to maybe to the next slide, and please type in your questions. Maybe video conference, if you have anything to add, we can stop in another slide, and we'll take questions and comments from you.
So now looking at the source of conflict and what is it? So conflict arises from and through thought and the limitations of thought. So thought in the sense of what my beliefs are, or my need for some kind of security, for doing it right, expectations, and what is actual. So through colonization or through cultural oppression, our whole thought process collectively and individually has been impacted. So Buddhists identify craving as the source of all suffering, and the 3 poisons of greed, hatred, and ignorance to be the cause of conflict. Also, when we look as Gitxan, Niska, and Tsimshian, we also acknowledge this want through thought in particular as potentially problematic. If we look at Otter Woman and how Otter Woman comes to those hunters who are not, after having gone through purification and going to take a life, who aren't focused on what their task at hand.
So behavior, yeah.
Yes.
Behavior. And so, to the people who don't know Otter Woman, did you want to go into that story a little bit more or no?
No.
We second. Can I go to video conference now? Video conference, there's many of you here today. Thank you so much for showing up. Did you want to unmute your mic and maybe ask some questions? Or if you have any comments about your own nations that you want to make as well, you can go ahead and do so. All right, and webinar, if you have any questions or comments, you can please kind of ask away. I would like to talk about the thought and limitations of thought. So we have these things that kind of come up in our heads, like assumptions and expectations and disappointments, and how do we kind of arise? How do we rise from that and deal with that conflict within ourselves? But how do you do that with other people too, who have those things at the same time? If these are the limitations, like how would you go into a place where people are having different expectations and assumptions?
Well, it's when our limitations are creating suffering. So one's thought limitations could be obsessive thinking, so or unfounded fears that just keep coming. We have, and this is my work as a psychotherapist. So many that I worked with, I saw my own thought patterns, and recognizing that those thought patterns came out of abuse, and that it wasn't something that was negative. Nor is it something that's negative. It's something that simply is. So when I can come to the place of seeing that my thoughts are cyclic in the way of creating suffering, then that's a good thing that I can see it. So because there's no judgment there, I'm just seeing it, I'm just observing it, the way the elders were sitting on the beach, seeing everything as it was unfolding. The heat of the sun, the dryness, the river, the way the river was running. So it's, I don't actually change thought myself. It's something that I look at and I recognize, and then I surrender. When purification is about letting go of my limitations, of my cyclic way of existing in the world, and surrendering to a force much greater than myself.
So you want to get to purification?
Yes, next one is purification. So we see fairly commonly that purification is, we see it in our sacred stories that it's an important part, that self-deception is a reality. So that's something that we were talking about in the previous slide, that mind cannot be relied upon. Clarity, wisdom, stillness, non-judgment comes from a source outside of ourselves, from that supernatural source. We purify with plant medicines, bathe in streams, fast and pray to purify our hearts and minds. All thought comes through the heart. So we know the state of our heart by what we think. And then the trick is just to be conscious of what we're thinking. The practice and discipline of purification trains the mind to be fully and completely present in the moment without judgment or expectation for a specific conclusion.
Staying in the body, staying in your spirit or your heart.
Yes.
Is there something that you initiate with communities when you go in, or that you use? Do you go in and use whatever the community's purification is? Do you start in that space? Is that something that you prefer to do when you're doing conflict resolution, or?
Yes, if I'm, depending on what the conflict is, and what the people ask for. So it generally, at this point in my life, isn't something that I would initiate. So I've been to communities where just naturally that's where when they, in particular there was a conflict that was created by the political leadership over territories, and then there was a division between hereditary and political leaderships. And
which happens in many communities.
It does.
Yeah.
Which creates division within and separation within families. And so this particular community decided they wanted to heal from that. So we discussed how that was going to happen. And what happened is started with a small group, and they simply did what we do in resolving conflict. They talked about their hurt, and they were responsible for their action to each other. And it was profound, really simple. They meant what they were saying, and it's afterwards, it's intending to be in right relationship afterwards. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to bathe, and so that was all their initiation. So we went ahead and we did that.
So purification can come at any point in conflict resolution.
Yes.
It can happen between any time. Can you tell me about setting up that space? You talk about people telling their true feelings.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of fear with people telling their true feelings and setting up space for that. Is there anything that you can initiate or facilitate, and specifically about that, where people can feel safe? If it's not through purification at the beginning, or say it can come at any point.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something else maybe besides?
I think it's articulating really clearly what the ancestral teachings are, because they're the ground. They're the safety ground. They're the safety net, and it's a force in and of itself. So it's being in that force. It's really critical. So in protocol, when we go into communities, when conflict arises in the community, the first step is determine first who caused the offense that resulted in suffering, and then secondly, who suffered. Next step is to investigate into the nature of the damage. So what was the harm? A third is to determine the process for articulating the damage. So at one point, does the person who was harmed sit down with the person who harmed? And that there depends on the nature of the offense. And then the fourth step is to discuss the acts that will be necessary in order to restore spiritual balance and to make things right. And once that's done, then we let it go. We don't bring it up again. It's gone. It's finished.
Can you speak specifically to that? I think that's a really important part of the entire full cycle of the process.
Well, I think one comes to realize it once you've gone through the other steps. So I can give a very personal example for this. I was sexually assaulted when I was working at a camp, and I asked one of their spiritual leaders if they would help me to confront this person and to come to some place of healing. And so he agreed to do that. And because it was in their territory, I did it in the way that this healer did it. And what happened is we went through the healing process. At the end of the ceremony, because this took all day, at the end of the ceremony, I could see the other person, and I could see their history because they talked to me about their history. I could see how that person came to that place of suffering, and that I was, in that particular time, a part of that person's suffering. So, is what they did right and respectful? No. but we confronted and addressed that, and the person asked for forgiveness. So the last step here then, the restoring of spiritual balance, comes as one goes through the whole process, and you don't go through it alone. And there's support. And
you initiated. This is something that you initiated. I mean, I think it's important to realize that
in this particular,
the victim has to be in the space where they're okay to do that too, or like
or somebody acts on their behalf.
Okay. All right.
Okay, next one. Internal, external. Conflict in our communities is compounded by conditioned thought, which we spoke about earlier, of inferiority and deeply ingrained patterns of behavior stemming from the violent environment of residential schools. So I identify there are many other ways we were socialized. There was segregation. There's the Indian Act. So there are others, but I see residential school when you take children and condition children to be well, it's difficult to grade it, but it is a great harm and impact on us. The key to freedom lies in what our ancestors have taught us regarding the mind. So our mind and how it functions, when we begin to see our pattern thought, then we can do something about it. We can get some help. We can go for have someone teach us about purifying if we don't know. Beliefs of inferiority die slowly and only with intentional action, as in the practice of purification. When we purify the internal, so that's my heart. I'm taking my heart when I go to bathe, and choose respect for self as the primary relationship of spiritual balance, the external will follow. So taking care of myself physically and eating properly and my relationship with you and others, that will all follow as I take care of what I need to within myself. I'm kind of pushing through now because of time. That's all right?
We have another, we're actually, our bridge is booked till 11:30. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, and I really like to get as many kind of anecdotes and stories and references as possible. And there's a couple of questions coming in too. So.
Okay. Should we maybe have a look at those questions?
There's a Smollett word for thought, which translates roughly from the heart. If our emotions are limited or distorted due to traumas, it is safe to assume that our limitations are increased or that they are decreased to somewhat neutral. If our emotions are limited or distorted due to traumas, is it safe to assume that our limitations are increased or are they actually decreased or somewhat neutral? So depending on our emotions that we were dealing with the trauma.
Well, the trauma itself is not only is it in our mind and brain, it's also in our body. It's because we respond physiologically to the act. So we want to call it the shift or the healing or the transformation comes from a relationship, always in nature actually, and always on the land, outside of self. So
I think you specifically talk about the traumas associated with colonization, internalized manifestations which present as colonialism. So these things too, are they limitations for us?
Yes, they are limitations, but when one recognizes them as limitations, what are they then?
They just exist, and you can kind of raise above the existence of.
Again, it's not. I see that I don't make change happen. That what I must choose to do is is die to that. So there's this Robbie Robertson, it is a good day to die. And that's something that that's how change happens. So I don't make it happen. The supernatural does.
Surrender.
Yeah, my responsibility is to die. So that goodness can emerge. Because it will.
If there's any other questions, they are coming in. I'll let you continue on.
Okay.
But I'm going to say, webinar, please feel free to type away, and comments or questions, and we can deal with them at the end of the slides too.
Okay. I refer to Buddhism because I found in my study and involvement, their teachings are really similar to our Ayao, to our ancestral law. So here I'm referring to some points in a book by the Dalai Lama, An Open Heart. So what he's saying about how we come out of cyclic existence is first we recognize that we're suffering. Second is seeing how my emotional response, such as anger and attachment, how much I want something to change, keeps that cycle of misery happening, keeps it going. A sense of frustration and disgust eventually arises from my behavior. So I see that I keep doing this behavior that is most likely, if we're talking about anger, is creating harm to another person. And then that's the yellow light that comes before the red. So the sense of disgust or the sense of frustration is about a need to stop and to look at my powerlessness over whatever it is I keep doing and not wanting to do. So, and then next is we develop compassion for self with the intention to free self. And so once I see and understand myself and how I arrived to being the parent that I was, how I arrived to being the spouse that I was, and truly understanding, truly going into, not to excuse myself, but just to see. Then what happens, and this is again, I keep going back to the elders along the riverbed, it is something that comes outside of self, this compassion and this understanding for myself. It's this softening that happens. It's respect, and like a berry, ripening, or a plant coming from the ground. And then when that happens, then we're talking about purification of the heart. Then what I want to do is I want to be able to give away. I want to be able to give to others.
Somebody was asking in regards to when you say it's my responsibility to die, do you mean to confront the truth of the trauma in us? I was almost thinking about loss of ego. Maybe that's a little too Freudian, but when can you articulate the responsibility to die? It's your responsibility.
Right. No, it isn't. The question again was to... When you say it's my responsibility to die, do you mean confront the truth of trauma in us? Yeah. Truth is something we come to, or it comes to us. And so we can turn away and not look at it. We can go to some place that seems safe because of fear usually. And I think that facing truth is something, isn't so much about dying, not yet, but doing something that I need to do in order to come to some place of understanding myself and the situation. Gradually the understanding expands.
So when you say responsibility to die, you're actually just saying about being a human being and living our life to the cycle of death.
Yeah, and
it's a literal.
Yeah, I can speak again to something very personal. When I was, when my children were small, I had a great deal of rage in my life, and I didn't see how much guilt and shame that I had as a mother for the things that I wanted to be able to do but really didn't know how to do. So for my way of being to change, in other words, to what I wanted was to be closer to my children, but because of the guilt and shame, it was this huge calcification that was between them and me. So what I needed to do was to die to that guilt and shame, to accept that I really did the best that I knew how to do, and I didn't know how to do what it was I desperately wanted to do, which was hell. So I hope that answers the question for that person.
And video conference, there's somebody, do you want to ask a question?
This is Marianne, I'm in Kispia.
Hello.
I'm wondering, you're talking about, you were talking about with the elders and how they can help in the healing process, but in my practice, I'm a registered nurse, and we do meet with RCMP, the band members, but what we don't see is community involvement. We don't see the elders, we don't see anybody coming and saying what you said you had experienced when you went through a sexual assault. I don't see any community practice, and I am Gitsan, and I see that not just in this community, but in several other communities where people are hesitant to say anything, and people are afraid of retribution. And that doesn't just apply to spousal assault, doesn't apply to drinking and driving. It's a big thing. A lot of things happen with alcohol, but nobody seems to want to discuss anything around here. Yet when we go to feasting, that's all we hear is ayuch, and that's all we hear is respect. And we don't see any actions. And we hear it from chiefs, we hear it from counselors. So how do you think we should get people really say what you do and practice what you say you practice?
Thank you, first of all, for your question, and my immediate response is pain, and it's the reality of where our communities are today. You've just outlined it. So when I was working as a psychotherapist, I thought about what my mother said when she was in Gitcatla in the 40s, and what she did as the field matron was she went into the homes and met people where they were at. I think that changing how we think is it's challenging, and you've identified it as so. It's also painful, and what I see is it happens with one person and one family at a time.
Thank you so much. I think that lots of people were probably having the same thoughts as you as far as our communities. So thank you for iterating something that everyone else is probably thinking. This kind of goes into the question of is there a role, Gordon asks, is there a role for apology and forgiveness? Is this just a modern practice? Is there a place for those things?
Oh, definitely, because when an individual recognizes that they caused harm, the apology, depending on what the harm was, is about what they are giving to compensate for that wrongdoing. That is the apology. So depending on the nature of the offense, yeah, that's what it depends on, is the nature of the offense.
Can you maybe talk about that in feasting? There might be some people who haven't practiced or from urban areas too listening. So
right.
That there's usually gift exchange and reciprocity in it.
Yes. So I can give an example of a feast that I was invited to on Haida Gwaii, where an incident had happened where someone was physically harmed and
by another individual.
Yes,
yeah.
And so the individual who caused the harm hosted a feast, and at that point gave gifts to the individual who was harmed and to that individual's immediate family, to their spouse, to the extended family, because of the nature of the harm that was done physically. So that feast was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then we as witnesses were given a 3-course meal. The person who had done the harm had gone out and got all the fish, prepared all the, had not prepared, but hired someone to prepare, and got all of the food that was given out to us as witnesses. So sometimes it can be, depending on the damage, the monetary cost can be fairly high.
Or we can give each other gifts and reciprocity for small wrongdoings, but there's a big role of the witnesses taking place there too. And when you said the fifth stage was kind of not mentioning it any longer, so it's that resolution.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of that whole.
Yeah, and it's depending on who's involved. Yeah, that's how the decision's made, and the chiefs usually, they're the ones who make the decisions on whether a feast is necessary. So there's always going to be somebody who's in authority that can guide and direct.
Is there any more comments from video conference? Anybody out there, comments or questions? We'll make a break at the end too, so we have one more slide left, and then we'll take more. So thank you, Gordon, for your question.
So looking at advisors from the community, the advisor from the community needs to be identified so that they can take the lead on behalf of the community. So this would mean that the particular tribe or the community or family, they are the one who identifies who's going to act or speak on their behalf. The hereditary leadership need to be involved from the very beginning. So they need to be informed that that if I, as an outsider, am coming in and they've identified who my contact is going to be, then the relationship it's up and rolling. Political leadership, when not directly involved, they also need to be informed, because often what you'll have is those who are in political leadership, so we're talking about the DI imposed leadership.
Yeah, Aboriginal affairs, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That sometimes they're also hereditary leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And always that the community or the tribe, they take the lead in whatever it is that needs to be done.
All right. Is there any way that you go into communities and is there any communities that you've had to go into and who've asked you to help sort of do this, and maybe it hasn't worked out because the political and hereditary wasn't on the same page, or is there different points of entrance? Do you sometimes just go to the matriarchs to deal with things? Is there I mean, there's communities that are kind of set up in different ways.
Yes, there have been times when it's only made it so far, because what we were facing was that it was a particular hereditary leader, and they were behaving in a way that was bringing shame to their particular tribe, and so I was asked to help out. And so the whole process from there was the ones who had authority in this person's life, they put rules on the individual that were very harsh. So, and that is another reality that we face. So as the person from Kispioks identified, that there's a wall and there's a barrier up, in particular to confronting and addressing sexual abuse and incest. Also, when action is taken, what we have is, I would call it internalized oppression, where because I believe myself to be inferior, I'm going to be a lot harsher on my own people than I am on anyone else, because I believe that we are inferior. And now often it's not something that's conscious, but I've been conditioned to believe that. So that's a distortion, it's not true. But behavior or action is going to really show what I believe. So, you know, we can look at inaction as being coming from the belief that nothing's going to change for us. That it's going to be the way it is, that we are subhuman, that we are inferior as human beings. So these are conditioned beliefs, all not true.
Would we be able to take the PowerPoint slide? We'll just take questions, I guess, right now, and then we can wrap up. I have a video conference. Feel free to let us know anything that you would like to ask. And webinar, I have a few more questions on webinar. Video conference, do you have anything first? All right. I have one. Is there a place? Okay, how do we incorporate these ancestral teachings into policies that affect communities? That's a big one that I think people are trying to constantly identify.
And in going through university, that is the problem. All I have to think about is being told that I was to write Tsimshian pedagogy in a paper. And I said, not possible. Not possible to do that. So policies, I think that maybe if we flip it, and if we were to begin to look at ancestral law as being our touchstone, and that from there our ethics and policies are developed, then we're thinking in a different way.
And you're being informed by that law. That's what you're being.
Yes.
The policies are being informed from that.
Yeah, because there are many times when I don't know what I should do, and so that's fine that I don't know, because there will be someone who will show me what to do next.
And another question, if the source of the conflict goes beyond lifetimes of those involved, such as feuds, like family feuds, murders or old murders, how applicable is the approach that you have given an example of here? And what would that look like? How would that work?
A great question. These are really great questions.
Yes, thank you. Keep them coming. Okay.
I could speak to this one. In 1996, our family had a potlatch in Bella Bella, because what I didn't say was my father's mother's from Githatla, and that's where my mother was adopted. And my father's father is from Bala Bala. Yeah, he was Celtic. And Henry, I didn't know that he was Celtic until I was a fair bit older, because he spoke Somalian. He was a fluent Somalian speaker and Chinook speaker. But his mother was murdered, and so he vowed that he would never go back to the village. So this was something that happened before me, before my father. And after, he said when he died, he was to be buried beside Kathleen, my grandmother, in Prince Rupert. So after some time and gathering up bits and pieces, because he never spoke, I don't know that there's anyone in the family who actually know who murdered his mother, because he wouldn't speak of it. What we did as a family is we took his spirit back to his home village. So, in other words, we let go of any need to know who it was. We let go of it all. So I think that it is important to acknowledge harm that's going on between families, so that we can let go of it.
And not take it up ourselves, that
Yes.
legacy.
Yes.
So we can do that through our own ceremony and our own sort of process.
Yeah, I need strength to be able to do that.
Of course. Start from the place. Thank you. Is there a resource of people who advise or provide this kind of leadership for urban First Nations? I think that's a big question.
Well, I think it's simple, because it comes back again to the land and territory in which we reside. So there's already leadership in existence here, and when you're acknowledging this land and territory we're on, that's where it is.
It comes from that place.
So, which means that if there's any conflict that happens within one urban organization, then there are elders that you can go to, or that I can go to, that are here, and with protocol, in other words, acknowledging them and paying them for their consultation and advising. We can learn through experience and through accessing this valuable information.
We've been honored to have some of those people here. Some of those elders from Tsleil-Waututh and Coast Salish and Squamish. Joni asks, how do we pass these ancestral laws, or this ancestral laws, to our younger generation, who are always looking at their phones rather than the people they're sitting with?
I think that passing on our stories that are about respect are really, really important. Stories, I mean, within our own families. And then there are sacred stories that belong to our families or to our community. Finding out what they are and talking about them, passing them on. I think that's important too. Songs. The songs that I've learned aren't actually from Gitga'ala, they're from other places. But what I find is songs are incredibly strengthening, along with dances. I think the dances are danced to the song. So finding out purification, how people purify here, and seeing if you can be a part of it. Seeing if you can find someone to help you. Because where there's a will, there's a way, they say.
Is there anything video conference that you have? Anything that you want to say, or anything that kind of came up when you were listening? Any questions? I think we're kind of closing in on time now. We have somebody typing away here, so maybe I'll wait for him. So were you able to kind of put these ancestral laws into your dissertation? Like,
it took 13 years, but of course much longer than that, and I spoke with so many different people. Gitsan, Niska, and Tsimshian. And I found that to be just very strengthening. the institute itself, there wasn't. It was really difficult for me to find people who understood what I was trying to do, or finding a way to do it. That was the other thing. Finding a way to do it was. I had to go to people and to elders and to sit down and talk.
And you've presented this before too. You presented it at home when you finished your dissertation.
I did, yes, that's right. I followed protocol, and once I'd written the dissertation on ancestral law, or the Ayao, I went to my home community. Before I went, I asked if the fluent speakers could meet with me, and I had 5 show up, and they went through it word by word, page by page. And what they did after each chapter was they affirmed what was written, and they added to it. So the next thing that I would need to do is, under the chief of my house, is to feast it. So in some other feast that's happening.
So you went through the traditional protocols of respect within your own community while you were doing this sort of academic thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of balancing both worlds, which is just incredible to me that you're able to do that work. So Lisa said respect is paramount. Even within your own homes, learning from home first is the foundation of learning, living your nation's way of life. Awesome webinar. I find myself wanting to share my views and comments in all questions. Certainly got the wheels turning, and thank you very much. I loved it.
Wonderful.
Ian asks, how do we return to the primacy of Indigenous law and conflict resolution that is mostly oppressed by the Canadian legal system?
Oh, that's a good question too. I think that as we look at those of our people who are going in to be lawyers, they really need to be a part of this conversation. And but we do have protocol that already exists. Sometimes people are willing to follow it. Sometimes the houses are willing to follow it, and sometimes they're not. So how do we do it? I think it all happens always through sitting down together and beginning the dialogue. Is it possible? Hey, when it's in our territory, I think it is possible.
And there's lots of thank yous coming in and praise. There's one more question, still back to Michelle's talking about specifically, she's mixed about ancestors from Quebec, so she's in Quebec territory, and she wants to, she said, I'm supposed to try an elder there to help, or are there people in urban settings that can help me guide through my Cree ancestral law? It depends on what part of Quebec you're from.
Well, she needs to go home.
Yeah.
What that means is we find out where we're from and where home is, and that's where you know. And when you go back to your home territory, it's difficult for me to articulate, but it's the people from home that affirm in a way that goes beyond self and this current reality. It is so deep and so broad, which also means that wherever we call home, we also feel the pain and that the people are in, and the challenges that the people face.
And there was one person talking about, is there a place for non-Indigenous ancestral law? And if so, what does that look like? So, I know that's coming from a different place, but we all have ideas of respect within all cultures that kind of supersedes.
Right. I'm not sure what that...
Is there a place for non-Indigenous ancestral law? And I'm thinking, I'd have to get clarification from this person. Is it a place within Canada, you mean, or a place within the land? Because everyone comes from somewhere. And I think people that I know have really started to look at their own Celtic practices, their own pagan practices from whether that be like Ireland or Scotland or Britain. And there's a kind of a movement going back to like finding out what does that mean, who I am from there.
Right.
So, and I have those roots too.
Yes, as do I, through my mother. And I remember at one point, as I began to inquire into behaviour, I asked my mother, I said, well, what are your teachings? What are the principles from your culture? And what did you bring to us? And she just looked at me with her gray eyes and this look on her face, and she said, I don't know. And I thought, well, so far removed from the land of her ancestors.
Just being a settler and having to kind of figure that out. I know that's out there though. I see young people identifying now through their roots. Mm-hmm. And there is that knowledge that we're all Indigenous from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And the ideas of respect is humankind.
Yeah, and she was happy with knowing and being a part of the Gitga'aga people. So it wasn't that she rejected hers, she honored and respected what was so obviously there.
And I think that's it for today. So that was one of our it was a great webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing this 13 years of work with us, and all the knowledge that's come from all the different elders. It was just woven into that. So.
Yeah, and I remember them all. They were pretty amazing people, and very grateful for them. And for all of you that have been a part of this, thank you so much for joining in this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We have definitely please check out the registration. We have about 3 or 4 sessions a month happening. The next one is healing and dealing with crisis and trauma, adding tools to the box with Dee and Anita. Anita from Nachalnuth, Charleston, and that will be coming up in a week. And we also have about a dozen more through the end of December. Take a look at learningscircle.ubc.ca to register. I thank you, everyone. Thank you, Davina Ridley, for helping us with tech today. Catherine Barry, our education coordinator, Gurwinder Singh, and Rob from First Nations Health Authority that were able to get everybody on video conference today. There's lots of people behind the scenes that are able to help us make sure that this got done today.
And people are welcome to contact me. I don't know if you put that on the website or anything.
I didn't put it on the website. What we can do though is we can take the PDF of this presentation. I can put it up on our site, learningscircle.ubc.ca, on the post that Patricia was on. I can put some resources and links there, maybe for further reading.
Sure.
And also your email and contact we can put in that page. So if you want to get a hold of her directly with any questions, that's possible. So thank you all, and I'll email it out to everyone as well.
Great.
Okay. Take care. Have a good Wednesday.